Welcome into Steelers Talk. I'm your host, Jack Sperry. Thank you guys so much for joining me here on a beautiful Sunday afternoon. Yesterday, the Pittsburgh Steelers lost their second preseason game of the year versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers by a final score of 17-14. I put out my initial winners and losers list for that game last night. Still waiting on the All-22 film before I give any more thoughts on that particular game, guys. We'll probably talk about it a little bit more in tomorrow's video, so make sure you guys click that subscribe button if you haven't already, because we're going to give you guys free and informative Steelers content every single day on this channel throughout the 2025 season, and then also we'll be going live for every single Steelers game this year. Last night had our second live watch party of the year. It was a lot of fun. We're going to be having another one here on Thursday when the Steelers take on the Panthers in their preseason finale, so make sure you guys click that subscribe button to never miss a show and never miss a watch party. All right, so today we got some news to talk about, some good news potentially here for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Couple bits of good news and then a couple pieces of questionable news, and then maybe a little bit of bad news here. We'll start with the good news here to start off today's show, though, guys. Nick Herbig, who left yesterday's game after just 3 snaps with a hamstring injury. It doesn't sound like it's too serious. Mike Tomlin said in his post-game press conference last night that's not that serious. So I'm guessing it's either like a grade 1 strain or something like that, and it's not going to keep him out of the lineup too long. I would guess he's not going to play on Thursday versus the Carolina Panthers, but I would also say that it sounds like it's not that big of a deal, and he could be ready to go as early as week 1 versus the New York Jets. So that is certainly good news to hear that that's not going to be anything particularly serious, and the reason why he was pulled was kind of just to be cautionary with it. So to see Nick Herbig out there is something that I really want to see at the start of the season and all throughout the season. Of course, he dealt with a little bit of an injury issue last year, and based on the way Jack Sawyer has been looking on film through the first 2 preseason games, can't exactly say I'd have a ton of confidence as him being the third rotational edge rusher in this group heading into the year. But now moving on to some trade news around the National Football League. The Bengals are now reportedly listening to trade offers for star edge rusher Trey Hendrickson, who of course led the league in sacks last year and was really their lone star defensive player for that Bengals defense that, as we know, was so bad, not even Joe Burrow, who was putting up MVP numbers last year, could make the playoffs with, because they were just giving up points and points and points. They even gave up over 30 points to the Pittsburgh Steelers offense with Russell Wilson, right? They've given up 30-plus points to the Steelers with Kenny Pickett, Mason Rudolph, and Russell Wilson in the last 3 years. And now, because apparently Hendrickson and the Bengals want to get something done with each other, but they just have certain things that they can't get done within this deal. So now the Bengals are listening to trade offers for Hendrickson. It seems like they're really serious about moving him somewhere else. Now, Jordan Schultz from Fox Sports reports that the Indianapolis Colts, the Carolina Panthers, and the Cleveland Browns are the teams that are reportedly interested in trading for Trey Hendrickson. 3 teams that I wouldn't necessarily peg as teams that would be favorites to land Hendrickson. Certainly they have the cap space to make it work, but like the Panthers, the Browns, teams that are not really in Super Bowl contention right now. The Colts don't really have a great grasp of their quarterback situation either, unless they really believe in Anthony Richardson to have a breakout season this year. Some other names that I would say keep an eye out for here, guys, are the Green Bay Packers, the New England Patriots, and maybe even the Washington Commanders as well. Those are teams with enough cap space that have interest in potentially getting an edge rusher, and then maybe a dark horse would actually be the Philadelphia Eagles, who actually traded for John Mechie earlier today, but we'll talk about that here in a little bit. Here's what I want to say about the Trey Hendrickson situation, guys. If the Bengals trade away Hendrickson and they don't add another good defensive player in this trade that they're apparently trying to facilitate right now, this might be the worst defense in the National Football League this year, and we might be looking at a very similar kind of story where Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase and T. Higgins might be lighting up the scoreboard, but their opponents every single week are also going to be lighting up the scoreboard, and Joe Burrow is going to be asked to win shootouts time and time and time again, week after week after week, yet again here in 2025. And if they only made it with 9, if they only got 9-8 as their record last year, with Hendrickson leading the league in sacks, being top 5 in pressure rate and in pass rush win rate, take him out of the equation with a new coordinator coming over from college, and that might be the worst defense in the National Football League. this year. So obviously if that ends up happening and Hendrickson gets traded away, that is good news for the Pittsburgh Steelers in terms of, for sure, keeping their standing in this division as the second best team in the AFC North. Obviously they want to move up to that number 1 spot this year, but with the Bengals defense potentially getting even worse than it was last year, it certainly helps out the Steelers' chances of not only retaining at least the second spot in this division this year, but also in their games, the 2 games that they're playing against the Cincinnati Bengals this year as well. So those are some things to keep your eye on with Trey Hendrickson. There was also some wide receiver news today around the National Football League. John Mechie, formerly with the Houston Texans, is now a member of the Philadelphia Eagles. The Eagles are sending a tight end and I believe a 5th-round pick for Mechie and a 6th-round pick. So that was something that I was keeping my eye on, guys. I thought Mechie would have been a really good fit here in Pittsburgh. He's a good run blocker, good route runner, would have been kind of exactly what they're looking for, and kind of that Z wide receiver on the other side of DK Metcalf. Of course, he was connected to the Steelers last year as well. But it seems like the Steelers are pretty content with Roman Wilson heading into the season. Jeremy Fowler from ESPN reported earlier today that pretty much the reason why the Steelers haven't gotten another receiver in the offseason, at least not to this point, to be their number 2 receiver, is because they really like Roman Wilson, and they have been apparently very impressed with Roman's start to the preseason and what he's done in Steelers training camp as well. And over the last 2 weeks, Roman has had really good practices, and he's had 2 really good performances in the preseason games themselves. We saw it last night with 72 yards on just 2 catches, right? So big playability from Roman. He's shown his ability to get open down the field against starting level corners. I mean, he completely burned Jamel Dean, one of the starting corners for a good Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense, on a post route yesterday for a huge game. Came down with a nice hands catch on a pass that was slightly behind him from Mason Rudolph, and then of course he got wide ass open on that intermediate crosser. Of course, made another good hands catch, and he's just been pretty darn impressive throughout the preseason and over the last few weeks at training camp. So the Steelers feel like that he can play that number 2 role in this offense. All right, and what I mean by number 2 role is not necessarily that he's the second best overall receiver on the team. I think that Calvin Austin III is still the best, most complete receiver on the team outside of DK Metcalf. Calvin is a great route runner. He's really good after the catch with really good vision. I think he's got underrated hands. He made some really tough catches down the stretch for this Steelers team last year. It's just he can't run block, and with all the condensed looks that the Steelers run in 12 personnel, and they want everybody except the quarterback to be able to block on those early downs, Calvin just doesn't bring that value to the team. And, you can make an argument Calvin honestly isn't the best fit for this offense because of that, but Calvin is still a good and honestly really good 3rd receiving option as a passing down specialist, but that still leaves an opportunity for somebody else to assume that quote-unquote wide receiver 2 role within this Steelers offense that's out there on early downs and gets those extra 200 snaps that Calvin Austin is just not out there for because he doesn't fit what the Steelers require from a blocking perspective out of that number 2 receiver. Now, Roman Wilson isn't the biggest guy in the world, but he can run block. He brings the boom, he brings the effort, he's got the functional strength to do it. And he's shown off that run blocking ability in the preseason thus far. He's shown it off in the training camp practices as well. And it seems like the Steelers, that was part of the reason why they wanted him out of Michigan, is because that was a very run-heavy team with the Wolverines that ended up winning the national championship. He was used to run blocking on most, if not just about every single down during a drive. And, his philosophy coming out of the draft was no block, no rock. So Roman is certainly somebody that is a willing blocker. He's pretty darn good at it. And, he also brings that element of speed and explosiveness, and he's got really good hands as well. So I think that his ceiling is capped. I don't think he's a true number 1 guy. I don't think he has that potential in him. But can he be, a very functional number 2 inside this Arthur Smith scheme? I absolutely think he can do that. And I think that their view of him is that he's going to be in that Van Jefferson role, where he's going to be playing wide receiver 2 level snaps, even though Calvin might be the more efficient receiver option on the Steelers this year. And then there's also the reality that the Steelers are going to be playing a lot of 13 personnel, so they don't need to be spending big money on another wide receiver to pair with DK Metcalf, at least not from their perspective, right? Because if you got 13 personnel out there and there's only 1 receiver out there, you're not going to be able to pay two receivers big money and still be able to play the offense that they want to play here. So they feel like 13 personnel gives them a big matchup advantage heading into the year, and that's what they're going to be trying to exploit. So having a guy like Roman Wilson, who is still unproven but fits kind of the wide receiver 2 role that the Steelers are looking for in this offense, while doing it on a rookie contract that's super affordable, I think exactly fits what the Steelers are looking for out of that number 2 receiver role. So we'll see if Roman pays off that trust and that faith that the Steelers are putting in him heading into the year. But it certainly seems like at this point, the Steelers are probably going to be going into the year with Roman Wilson as their number 2 receiver. And with Calvin Austin III slotting in as their number 3 in terms of total snap count. I will say that you can look for the Steelers to maybe poach a receiver after roster cuts. There's certain guys that could be hitting the market. The Panthers can't keep everybody in their room. Green Bay might not be able to keep all their players in their room. Malachi Corley looks like he's going to get cut from the New York Jets. So just keep your eye on the waiver wire kind of market there after roster cuts go through, because the Steelers, if there's somebody in that mix that they feel like could be an addition to this wide receiver room, I think that they could potentially add somebody there. But I do expect the 3 starters to start the season will be DK Metcalf, Roman Wilson, and then Calvin Austin III. And then Scotty Miller and Ben Skoranek will be the 2 guys that for sure make this team. Maybe a 6th guy gets in there. Maybe it's Brandon Johnson. Maybe it's Rock Taylor. Maybe it's Keshawn Williams. Maybe it's an outside guy that they bring in that was cut from a different team. But I think that they will for sure carry 5, and those 5 will be DK, Roman, Calvin, Scotty, and Ben Skoranek. And we'll see if they end up keeping a 6th in the weeks to come. But it's also a possibility here, guys, that Roman Wilson goes out there and the Steelers put all this trust in, and they give him an opportunity to be this team's number 2 receiver, and he just doesn't live up to their expectations, and he's not playing very well midway through the season. In that case, I think the Steelers will be buyers on the wide receiver market at the trade deadline, and there should be some pretty interesting opportunities at the deadline. I think Adam Thielen could be made available again. I think he would be a good fit here. Tyreek Hill, if the Dolphins are not playing well, I definitely think he'll be available at the trade deadline. If the Dolphins are kind of crumbling at that point, I think, the Green Bay Packer receivers that we've talked about, Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, Dontavian Wicks, those guys will probably be available at the deadline. At least one of them will be. So there will be some opportunities to add at this wide receiver room at the trade deadline, but the Steelers feel good about where they're at right now, given their current offensive philosophy and the way that they want to attack opposing defenses. So I think, you go into the year, like I said, DK Metcalf number 1, Roman Wilson number 2, Calvin Austin number 3 in terms of pure snap count, okay? And I think that's kind of their plan going into the year. If you don't like that plan, I can't say I necessarily disagree, because, Calvin and Roman haven't exactly established themselves as number 2 options in this league yet. And if, in a win-now season, you might feel a bit more comfortable adding an Amari Cooper or adding somebody else that could be a legit established number 2 presence in this receiver room. But the Steelers really seem to like Roman Wilson, and he has played well in the preseason and in training camp practices over the last couple of weeks. So it does seem like that's what the Steelers are going to be doing. All right, guys, that's going to be it for today's show. Thank you guys so much for making it to the end with me here today. Tomorrow, I'll be back in studio to break down a little bit more from what I see once the all 22 of yesterday's game comes out. Maybe a little bit more nuance on the offensive line and how they performed. Caleb Johnson, any more takeaways that I have from the film, I'll be sharing with you guys tomorrow. So make sure you guys click that subscribe button if you haven't already. Till next time, guys, here we go, Steelers.